Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Happy Doc. Really excited for our next guest, Dike Drummond. He has a website called thehappymd.com, and I think we're ready to go for this episode. Dike, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Dike Drummond from thehappymd.com. I want to bust a myth, though, right away. I'm not the Happy MD. That's the name of the website. It's The Happy MD. It's a place where you can go to get the tools so you can be a Happy MD. And you have to put the "the" on the front, because if you just put Happy MD, that's a porn site.
That is one way to start off this episode. So, what's something that gets you excited in the morning?
Oh, gosh. Well, since I started this work helping to prevent burnout, I've been on pretty much of a mission. And so I wake up excited for what's going to be in my inbox. I love the internet. I love what it makes possible for people to connect that are looking for help. And it's like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates when I walk in my office here. I get to work from home. And I get to make a huge difference, I think, for a whole bunch of different people, which is very, very different than I loved seeing patients. I loved being a family doc, but the leverage that you have in this kind of a world that's connected by the internet to help the profession is so much different than helping one patient at a time. Mm-hmm. It's really apples and oranges, but no, I wake up excited, and I work probably harder now than I did as a practicing doc, and I was a pretty darn busy doctor. But my work is a mission, and it's what I'm going to do till I can't do it any longer.
Wow. I love that. So if you were to sum up kind of what your mission or what you're trying to do in this world, what would you say it is?
Well, what I do is focus 100% of my professional energies on figuring out ways to help individual doctors recognize and prevent burnout, and help organizations create a work environment that plays its role in the physician's health, not the physician's stress level. So the culture and systems of an organization can either contribute to burnout or protect you against it. And 95% of them actually contribute, because the leadership team really doesn't know what to do to build a healthy culture. And an organization that employs 500 doctors is a brand new thing in the history of humanity. So everybody's trying to figure it out. I've just got a little bit of a head start on them because I've worked with so many doctors in so many organizations.
Wow. I am extremely excited about this conversation, like truly. One of my really good friends, Jay, is actually working on the culture scene in terms of the entrepreneurs kind of space. And I think that this is something that's still really fresh in medicine and healthcare. And I love that you're at the forefront of this. I'm picking up the pieces on the far side. Well, there you go. I love that you're kind of picking up those pieces. And so in a bigger sense, I checked out your website. I have a good sense of kind of what you're doing. For the listeners who aren't aware of who Dike Drummond is, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about the ways you're helping physicians and kind of the training and the camp as well that you have, some of those things that you're doing?
Sure. Let me also go back and earn the right? So I'm a family doc, med school at Mayo, residency in the UC Davis system, went to the Reading Family Practice Program when it was a 1-2 program. We managed a little community hospital. Last 2 years of my residency, delivered 254 babies, went out and was a full-service family doc and a member of a 40-doctor multi-specialty group for a decade. I was the managed care medical director. I was the chairman of the executive committee. I was the second highest producer. I ended up delivering 500 babies in the end. When I was 40, 1999, a long time ago now, my practice basically came crashing around my ears when I became incapable of continuing to see patients on a physiologic level. It felt like something in my middle sort of snapped. And I couldn't do it anymore. Up until then, I had really enjoyed it. my story is 3 generations old. I had mom and mom's mom who both wanted me to be doctors, so it's a long story. But after I quit seeing my patients in my practice full time, I struggled for a little while to put food on the table as a walk-in clinic doc. And then ultimately, my now ex-wife and I developed a successful little company where we were actually faculty to the United States Navy's Lean Six Sigma Black Belt certification program, a successful little training company. When that marriage went away, that business went away in 2010, I was burnt to the ground for the second time. So I remember my dark night of the soul, too. I remember curled up in the fetal position on the carpet on the floor of my home office, covered in my own tears and snot, wondering, what in the world do I do now? And I was handed this mission in that moment through a stroke of divine inspiration. I've been doing everything I can to live it since that time. At this point, it's been 8 years that I've been at this, and I have about 2,000 hours of one-on-one physician coaching experience. Several hundred doctors and I have hooked up arms and walked out of burnout together. I've worked with 140 different organizations, employer organizations, hospitals, associations, societies, trained about 25,000 doctors on how to recognize and prevent burnout. When I saw patterns, I wrote blog posts. I turned that into a book. We've sold 36,000 copies of the book now. And at this point in time, I also offer retreats. So our latest retreat is the Quadruple Aim Physician Leadership Retreat. So it's where physician leaders who want to be wellness champions can come to learn how to prevent burnout at 3 different levels: for themselves personally, for their teams, their intimate work teams, and for the larger organization. And then I also do consulting with organizations to help create a healthier culture and systems that work more effectively, soup to nuts, top to bottom, so that when you join an organization, it isn't, what's the right word? When you decide to leave a physician-controlled and owned group, a small group, and join a bigger group where you're an employee in a larger system, it's not a step upward in your stress levels.
Right. Absolutely. And, I'm really, you're such a large picture person, but you're also not only hitting it at the bigger levels, you're really taking it one-on-one as well. And I think that that's kind of the perspective you really need to make change at the multi-level kind of thinking, and also the coaching and all those things. So I'm really excited about what you do. And I took a look at one of your documents, and I really think it's a good start for our conversation in terms of some of the definitions we're working with and kind of the way you communicate what's going on in healthcare. So I looked at this document as the Matrix 2.0, and if you go to the happymd.com website, you can log on and you put in your email and you can get this kind of information sheet. And I started looking at it, and right away I was very excited because you kind of flip the whole burnout problem into a kind of very different conversation. So can we first
It's not a problem.
Right. So can we first touch on that? So why are you saying it's not a problem?
Well, when you understand what burnout is, it opens up a window onto all sorts of difficult challenges that we face in modern life that are not problems, but in the English language, for some reason, we use that word. And I would say, especially for a doctor, for a patient, because medical illness is another issue, those are issues that are not problems either. For doctors, for patients, for anybody in a leadership role, the word problem 95% of the time is used incorrectly. So let's just start at the beginning. Problem comes from mathematics. It's a very finely defined box. A problem, by definition, has a solution. And if I apply a solution to the problem, what's supposed to happen to the problem?
It gets solved.
It goes away, right? So let's just be really clear. 2 plus 2 is what?
4.
Give me another problem. 4 plus 4 is what?
8.
Give me another problem. Solution to burnout is what? And you're going to hesitate there, right? Because burnout is not a problem. As a matter of fact, the list that we call a problem list on a patient's chart is not a problem list.
Wow.
Example, problems, things that have a single shot solution in clinical medicine are very rare. But one of the clear examples is a pointing abscess. So if you've got a boil the size of a golf ball with a white head on it the size of your pinky fingernail and it's humming, it's so ripe, what's the solution? You're a psychiatrist. You should know the solution to this too, right? What do?
Well,
you open it up.
Right, okay.
Incise and drain, right? Open up. Just like if you have a pimple on your face, you squeeze it and get the pus out, right? Done. Okay? And I swear to God, family docs would pay me to drop 3 boils a day on their schedule because it's the one thing in the day you can solve and be done with.
I see what you're saying. So there's,
Real quick, though, that's not the normal patient, right? The normal patient is a 465-pound, out-of-control type 2 diabetic. They're missing one foot, had both eyes lasered. They're in for 90 oxy. And oh, by the way, on the way from the parking lot, they had a little bit of chest pain. And you can't squeeze the pus out of any of that because those issues for that patient and the issue of burnout for a doctor, those are all perfect examples of dilemmas. Never-ending balancing acts. You can't solve them. So let's stop using the word problem and the word solution when we're talking about burnout. You can address a dilemma only. You could do it really well, but you can only do it if you use a different S word, not solution. The word is strategy. A strategy is always multiple steps, usually just 3 to 5. And if I want to reduce the whole conversation around burnout to the simplest form possible, you can't have just one strategy. You have to have a personal strategy. So every doctor needs their own personal things that they do to take care of their energy levels, because burnout's about being below zero in your energy tanks. So everybody has to have their own personal strategy. We go ahead and call that resilience if we want to, but resilience is never adequate by itself, because we have to remember the situation is like a canary in a coal mine. Everybody who works in a healthcare organization is a canary, an indicator of the health of the mind. But what about the mind? We have to have an organizational strategy to lower the stress on the doctors and other caregivers in the system. So if you look at it, there's a couple of ways to maintain energy. You can lower your drain, lower your stress level. You can increase your ability to recharge. You can do some of that for yourself. The organization's going to kick in too. So if we do lower stress, increase recharge, personal organization, we get a 2x2 matrix. And what ends up happening is that our organization now has a list of 235 different ways that doctors and organizations can work together to prevent burnout. If you thought you were looking for the solution, that would be really confusing. But if you know you're just looking for 3 to 5 things that are unique to you, that's a big smorgasbord to choose from. And if somebody explains this to you, it should be relatively reassuring. Real quick, the boil that I lanced on that patient, would you put that on the patient's problem list? Yes or no?
I mean, in this case, yeah, we would say it's a problem.
You're not a primary care doctor, are you? Okay. No,
I'm not in that way.
That never goes on the problem list. All the docs that are listening here that are primary care doctors, the boil never goes on the problem list. The things that go on the problem list are the things you can't solve. It's actually, if we were to be true about the definition of that face page of the chart, it would be a dilemma list. If it was a simple problem, when we can fix it, it never goes on that list. So the error, the labeling error with regards to burnout is pervasive. So if you hear anybody talk about solutions and problem when they're talking about burnout, they fundamentally don't understand the nature of the beast, and they've never worked with doctors as a coach. I promise you that.
Wow. And I've never heard, it's sad actually, I've never heard this conversation talked like that. And actually when I was reading some of the matrix, some of the topics you were talking about, I was surprised that I wouldn't have heard any of this before and not in this format. And I think it's really sad. Yeah.
It's my mission, man. That's what I say when I'm in front of a group. I haven't even talked about the energetic bank account, too, and the programming of our medical education. These are 3 things everybody needs to hear as a resident, but nobody's teaching it.
Yeah. And I feel like it's almost a prerequisite. Like, I feel like this is the first conversation you're going to have in medical school. And so just to kind of summarize a little bit, what you're saying is there's different levels to the game. There's the personal stress level you have. There's the personal recharging that you have, and then there's the organizational stress level, and there's the organizational recharge. And then now let's go on to kind of that next logical step for us, which is the energetic bank account. Can you explain that to us?
Well, people often will use the metaphor of the battery. And when we talk about batteries, the image that always comes up in my head is the Energizer Bunny. And the Energizer Bunny comes pounding around all the time. But the metaphor of a battery is when your battery runs out, what would the Energizer Bunny do if his battery actually ran out? What would he do? Starts with an at.
Drop dead, let's say.
He would stop, right? So if burnout is something about my batteries are run down, I need a recharge, what that would mean is when your batteries run down, you would stop. But the problem is doctors never stop, right? If that were actually true, this is what I say, and I believe it to be true for sure. If that were true in every residency program everywhere in the country, every morning you'd come in and there'd be dead residents lining the hallway. And you'd have to scoop them up and throw them on the dead resident pile out front and recruit a new class every single stinking day. But that's not what happens, because the truth is it's an energetic bank account. And I'm going to get out a pen here. And that's a check. I'm going to write on the back of a check. Here it is, right? It's an energetic bank account. It's got a full mark. It's got an empty mark that's right here. And then it also has the ability for you to be below zero. So what happens is residency and medical school are an environment in which you become very skilled at continuing to function. It's not at your best. We could show that it's not your best work, but you keep showing up and you keep doing the work even when your energy is below zero. I call medical residency, at least it used to be. It's not quite the same as it used to be. It used to be the educational equivalent of waterboarding, where we would literally hold you under, not on purpose. Nothing's ever on purpose. But if you look for the justification of why are we trained the way we are trained, it all goes back to, I'm going to train you this way because that's the way
I did
was
it.
Trained. Yeah. That's the way I was trained. If we go back into the mists of time, nobody can tell you why that is, right? But what ends up happening is we get taught how to function in a negative energy environment. We show up no matter what, because if you don't show up even once, you are gone. And everybody knows at least one person who didn't show up in med school or didn't show up in residency. They got disappeared. What do they call it? Ghosted. They got ghosted, right? As if they never even existed, right? And so what ends up happening is inside of us are three energetic bank accounts. There's a physical one, an emotional one, and a spiritual one. They can be in a positive balance, but they can also be in any pattern of negatives too. And if you go triple negative, physical, emotional, spiritual energy below zero for any period of time, there are physiologic and emotional and relationship consequences to that, because that's what burnout is. Nothing to do with batteries. It's about figuring out how to maintain a positive account balance for your energy in all three channels.
And I'm just really excited that you're talking about energy. It's interestingly enough, in my podcast, it's actually something I bring up a lot. I ask the question to most of my guests, which is, what brings you energy in your day? And I think it's just such an important question. Now, you've kind of broken it down. You said physical, emotional, and spiritual energy kind of bank accounts or levels of who you are as a personal perspective. Can you tell me some signs and symptoms of let's talk about the negative side first. What are some signs and symptoms of negative physical, emotional, or spiritual parts of a human?
Well, this is where it all starts to interlock, because it's basically the three symptoms of the Maslow burnout inventory, right? So symptom number one of burnout, according to the MBI, which has been around since the 1970s, is exhaustion. So exhaustion that doesn't respond to reasonable rest, physical and emotional exhaustion, where you say to yourself, there's a little voice in the back of your head often says, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going like this. That's a sign of physical exhaustion. That's the first thing that you're pressed on. Sleep deprivation, and we could go on and on and on. It's not nearly as bad now as it used to be across the board, but surgical interns still pretty much have it as bad as they ever used to. Surgery is a thing where in the internship year they literally try to kill you. Literally attempt to rub you out just to see if you can take it. Emotional, if you look at the second symptom of burnout, it's cynical, sarcastic, compassion fatigue, venting, that kind of stuff. That is an emotional defense mechanism. When you have nothing, you're tapped out. And part of the reason that it happens, well, let's just go back. Physical, the reason that happens is that time demands take away most people's ability to carry out good health habits. And we're in an environment where we're surrounded by unhealthy things, sleep deprivation, bad food, I can keep going, sick people. So we learn a whole bunch of coping mechanisms that are based on simple survival of residency that are not useful in the long run. They're only for survival. And you can survive 4 years of residency, but then what? You're 30, and you got the rest of your freaking career to figure this out, and you didn't learn any useful things in terms of self-care habits as a resident. Emotional energy comes from relationships, and what typically happens is we cone down our relationships to just a couple of colleagues and maybe our first-degree relatives, but a larger group of people that you used to interact with and friends and go out and have a social life goes away. Right? So it's really easy to get to the point where you feel like you haven't got any emotional energy for yet another needy patient. So exhaustion, compassion fatigue. And then the last symptom of burnout, according to the Maslach Burnout Inventory, is what she called lack of efficacy. Basically, it's where you say to yourself, what's the use? I'm really not making a difference here. What that means is that the person's become disconnected from their purpose. And if you can't feel a connection with purpose in your choice to give your 20s to a career as a physician, that's a spiritual disconnect. And you have to be able, I think, to maintain physical and emotional homeostasis in order to be able to nurture that spiritual connection. Because if you whack somebody hard enough physically and emotionally, you can break anyone. And a lot of people are broken along the way to getting their board certification.
Wow. So that was really thorough. I appreciate that response. And as I'm hearing this, and I know all my listeners, like I have medical students on here, I have residents, I have physicians, they're totally going to connect. This is exactly what I see every single day. I can think of an example of a resident today who is absolutely exhausted and venting and doing all that stuff. So it's not... this is something where I'm seeing every single day. So absolutely. Now, let's switch this to the positives.
Can I make one quick point?
Absolutely.
When everybody's burned out, the culture will say that you have to vent and that venting is healthy. That's a sign of the level of burnout in that ward or wing or that service. So when you find yourself justifying things that are signs of burnout, because venting is a sign of burnout. If you feel like you've got a vent or you can't go back out there, that's a sign. That's not healthy, okay? That's a sign. And if everybody's doing it, I know there are plenty of services around the country where the burnout rate is 100% across the board, from the ward secretary all the way to the custodial staff. So just watch for that when it becomes pervasive.
Yeah. And it's interesting you're saying this. I haven't opened up to many people about this, but I think this is a perfect conversation to say this. In my culture, sometimes I feel uncomfortable to be happy because
what makes you think you're so special?
Yeah. So it's almost like because the people around me are very exhausted all the time, when I'm in a positive mood, it looks unusual, like there's something wrong, that I'm not participating or that I'm not doing something, as if smiling... Right, as if smiling is a problem. And
well, just think if you let them know that you like EMR and you're getting home with your charts done on time. Oh my God, they'll stone you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so it's just, and I'm not trying to bash the people I work with. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that on a kind of global level, I think there's a problem and we got to figure out solutions. And that's exactly why I'm kind of talking to you, obviously.
It's a dilemma. We need some strategies.
Beautiful.
Some tools to create a strategy.
There's a dilemma and we need some strategies to kind of solve this dilemma. I love that. So now let's flip this conversation to the upper tiers of energy in terms of what we might see physically, emotionally, spiritually. What is our ideal example? What does that look like in a human being?
Well, set the trigger for thrive, not survive. Set the trigger for optimal, not minimal, right? Most people only learn how to take care of themselves physically, emotionally, spiritually in recovery from one of their episodes of burnout, because the incidence of burnout across the lifetime of a medical career is well over 100%. I'd put it at 200 or 300%. I got 2 going, right? Most people I know with my amount of gray hair have 2 or 3 episodes of burnout. But hopefully they're learning experiences and you come out a better adjusted, healthier, happier person on the far side. But I think that there's an inner aspect to this. So for instance, gratitude is super important because we're trained to notice disaster all around us.
Right.
So there's an inner game of how you're being, and there's an outer game of what you're doing. And the what you're doing is fairly straightforward, right? Eat good food, get plenty of rest, get exercise, stay healthy, right? Keep connected with your friends, have time outside of work, have a boundary ritual so you can let work go and separate yourself from the worries and all that kind of stuff. But one of the most fundamental things that is hardest to get a doctor to do is to see anything worthwhile going on in the world. And I want to just point out just right now, because again, there may be medical students and residents that are listening that are in the act of being conditioned. I just want you to know the act of a differential diagnosis is pure abject paranoia. And what I try to do is help people throw differential diagnosis in reverse, because it can be used in reverse as a gratitude tool. So for instance, differential diagnosis. See this purple spot on my wrist? What are 18 ways I can die from that? Okay. So what I tell people is Taylor, if you and I became good friends and we went on a vacation to New York City, and if we were in the balcony over Grand Central Station looking at where all the people are down below, right? We would look out, as doctors, we would look out over that scene down below, and it would take us each about 10 seconds, and at the same time, we would see the one person down there who's limping. Now, there might be 10,000 people down there, but we'd see the one who's limping, and then we'd get in an argument about whether it's a hip or their knee. And only doctors do that. In the same span of your eyes, there's a man on his knees proposing to his girlfriend, and she's crying, right? There's another one like the soldier scene after the Second World War. He's kissing the girl and her foot's in the air, right? There's a little girl with a dog. We don't see any of that. We see the limping one, right? So to get doctors to be grateful, to play the inner game, it's not playing, to live the inner life of how magnificent the world is. For instance, do any of your teeth hurt, Taylor?
No.
Are your underpants dry at this moment in time?
Surprisingly, yes.
Excellent. So we could just as easily right now as do anything else. We could be grateful for your non-toothache, your dry underpants. Let's just keep going. Indoor plumbing, hot water, right? A roof over my head, clothes on my back. I could keep going. It's a reverse differential diagnosis. How many ways are things perfect right now? And you know that you're entering that place where you become stronger and stronger as an individual when it takes more and more to knock you off center into being Eeyore and seeing only what's not working, and more robustly about, yeah, that was unfortunate, but you know what? Things are in balance are really pretty damn good. And it's not about trying to convince somebody in a bad situation to do positive pop psychology and just blow it off. Yeah, you do things in your own interest. You create your strategy, but you also have some room in your psyche to overcome your programming and notice what's going right in this moment.
Yeah, wow. And as you're saying that, again, that this conversation is not happening. There's nothing about this reverse thinking in terms of what am I grateful for right now? What are the good things that are going on? And, often even in terms of feedback, when you ask for feedback, there isn't always a lot of positive talk in that feedback. It's usually focused on, well, you really should have done this in your physical exam, and you should have done this. You needed to consider this in your differential, and so I think there's definitely some room in terms of kind of adding in a lot of that positivity for sure.
There's room for mentorship in feedback, and feedback is not always critique, right? So the habit of hammering somebody, right? Belittling somebody, bullying somebody, reaming them a new one because they didn't get something right in the differential diagnosis. That's just a habit. And it certainly is not the best way to learn, but it's quite common.
Yeah. Wow. So, we're talking about burnout as a dilemma. We talked about the fact that part of that dilemma or issue that arises is the energy that an individual has, and also the energy within the organization, the stressors and the recharging. We talked about those parts of it, and you kind of already gave us some almost strategies within this. What are some of your favorite strategies that you talk to people on a personal level?
One of the big ones is simply to acknowledge that we're conditioned along the way. Usually, I'm a family doc, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, 7. I've seen people with as many as 16 years in the medical education system. But we're conditioned to be workaholic, superhero, lone ranger, perfectionists. It's part of the reason we applied to medical school in the first place, because we had those as character traits: superhero, workaholic, lone ranger, perfectionist. They were some of the things, when you use them as tools, that gave us the grades for us to be optimistic that we could make it through the medical education system. But then for the rest of your career, from that point forward, you're going to use those every single day. We tend to become those things. And the conditioning leads to automatic behavior. So, for instance, a workaholic only has one coping mechanism.
More work.
Work harder. And workaholics aren't particularly creative. They double down doing the same thing each time. And so typically when I meet somebody and I'm coaching them, they've done the same thing for so long that they've literally busted themselves against the wall. They can't go any farther. So it's important to know that a lot of the behaviors that you have, and your significant other will tell you this. They don't understand it either. Most of the time when I'm training about burnout prevention, it's with significant others in the room. So their couples are there so they can help each other out. But these automatic behaviors, it's important to recognize them. It's also important to figure out a boundary ritual, meaning figure out a way to leave work at work, especially if you're not on call that night. So, for instance, you have not got an effective boundary ritual when you find yourself sitting at home thinking about work. Has that ever happened to you, Taylor?
all the time.
Of course.
And also, when I am not responding in timely manner, sometimes I've been punished.
Of course.
So not only has that happened, obviously, I'm encouraged to respond quickly and those types of things.
Right.
And that I think that's true for a lot of hospital systems.
Well, and I'm not talking about a time when you're carrying a beeper or you're on call or you're in-house. I'm talking about you're off, right? You're legitimately off. If you were a shift worker, you would have punched the clock, and this was a day when you're off the clock and you're at home. Are you still thinking about work? Yes, because nobody's ever taught you a way to segment, to provide boundaries between work and home. And it's basically a boundary ritual. There's any one of 100 of them, but all you have to do is, at some point on your way home from a day of work, especially now if you're on call or you're going to chart later on that night, we can talk about that at some other time. But I'm just talking about on the days when you come home and you're not on call and you don't have anything else to do with work, to do something where you say to yourself, with this action, I'm coming all the way home. Take a big breath. Use your OB lips if you want. Right, with this breath, I'm coming all the way home.
I love it.
right? And it doesn't matter what it is, right? So for instance, a lot of people do this spontaneously, right? So I talked to a guy the other day. He said, 60-year-old guy said, ever since I've graduated from residency, my whole family knows that until I come home and change my clothes and look at the mail, you don't talk to me. And that's his boundary ritual. It takes him about 15 minutes, but nobody even looks at him until after he's done opening the last envelope, Valpak or whatever, right? And he's changed his clothes. It could be any one of 1,000 things, but the mentality is, with this action, I'm coming all the way home. I'm letting the doctor off my back.
Wow, I love it. I love that. So you mentioned the boundary ritual, which I think, you're mentioning, and you coach a lot of people. That sounds like a really, really big issue. And you mentioned earlier being grateful as some of those strategies. And when you're looking
just noticing what's going right.
What's going
right.
Because
our whole profession is noticing how many different ways that little spot on your skin could signal something going horribly wrong.
Right. And like you were talking about before, in terms of habit forming and conditioning, we're creating this habit of just focusing on the negatives. Now, we're doing it to our patients, but I'm sure that reflects in our self-talk as well.
We become Eeyore.
Right.
If you remember Eeyore, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, where's my tail? And I would say another thing that's really important to your listeners who are in medical school or residency is to maintain as much breadth as you can in your relationships and your interests. So, for instance, when a person decides to go to medical school, they may have a very well-rounded life, several hobbies, large groups of friends associated with the hobbies. For me, what got me through medical school and residency was I played rugby. I was the captain of the rugby team in the towns where I went to medical school and residency. And if it wasn't for banging heads and drinking beer on the weekends, I don't know how I would have got through it, right? But what ends up happening is when you cone down your life to just your studies, you jettison all your friends and your hobbies, there's this act that goes on where I always imagine it like this. Imagine a deck of cards fanned out in your hands, and these are your friends and your hobbies. And what you do is you fold it up into a deck and you give it a kiss and you go, I'll get back to you one of these days. One of these days, I'm going to get back to y'all. And then you slide it in your back pocket. And what happens when you burn out at the age of 50 is you notice that it's still in your back pocket. And you get out your old SLR camera and you start doing photography again and join the photography club downtown and start to become more of the person, the trajectory you were on before you entered the black hole of the medical education system. That's not bad. We got to make doctors. We still got to imbue everybody with all the skills and the awareness of being an effective doctor. We just need to do it in a way that doesn't take such a toll.
I love that. No, absolutely. And one of the things we talk about on this podcast is maintaining those creative parts of yourself. We talk about like the left side, logical side and the artistic side, and we're just all logic. And then there's none of that artistic, creative, none of those juices that really got us going. Actually, for me, I talk about this a lot, is the podcasting itself, like having this conversation, like opening up my doors to networking and making friends and talking to people online is just energetically very exciting for me. And it's one of the reasons I can smile at work and they don't get it. And it's like, come on. But anyways.
Well, let me slow it down and show you what's going on. Okay. Yeah. So for some people, they insist that their creativity, their creative focus, and their purpose come from their profession. It doesn't have to be that way. That's putting a lot of pressure on your profession, right? So one of the things that can sometimes happen as you get some practice experience under your belt is you can realize that I can go into work and I can have a great time being a doctor, and I can do my job and I can draw a boundary when I'm done, and I can find my creative outlet and I can find my purpose outlet elsewhere, not at work. I don't have to push all of that into my career if it's not obviously there for me? And so you see people who, I just talked to another guy training in New York just the other day, said, yeah, when I turned 50, I started flying jet helicopters. It's like,
yeah.
What do you podcast, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to put the pressure on all of your purpose and all your creativity coming from your vocation.
I love that. And I think the difficult part is think about how much time is spent in the vocation, right? Like how much time do you spend in medical school, residency, surgeons, like that's all their time. And then to tell them that that's not who you are or that's not entirely your purpose. I feel like it's such a hard pill to swallow in some ways that you're saying, wait, I'm more than just a surgeon. I think that's, a really difficult part.
Well, it's not like we're telling them they're more than just a surgeon. It's that you wake up in your 40s because you were in school until you were 35, right? And you say to yourself, is this all there is? Because I can be a rock star surgeon. However, if that is the apex of my life before I die, there's something missing there's a search that's going to happen for where that level of fulfillment comes from. And surgeon is you got it. I got the skill set. I got the 10,000 hours. I'm really good at it, right? I'm on autopilot when I'm doing certain things. It doesn't take a lot of investment of time and energy for me because I've reached a level of expertise. But my grandkids are where it's at, or my jet helicopter, or my podcasts.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. So, Dike, I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this, and I actually think I'm going to definitely need to welcome you back on again.
I warned you.
I know this. Yeah, I mean, I can tell. I can tell you're just going to be. You're going to have a lot of great messages for my listeners. And what I'd like to say is, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Sincerely, I think just like the information you're giving is definitely gold, and I can tell you definitely coach because you're pulling examples from people's lives that you've had those personal experiences, and it's extremely helpful. So something I'd like to ask all of our guests that we have on is, what is a tip or a takeaway you want to have from this conversation today? You're really thinking deeply about this one.
Well, I'm trying to think of something that would be meaningful. Yeah. And I guess the most important thing is it's okay to be human. Mm. It's okay to cry, to be in pain, to ache, to love, to pray, to fail, to miss a diagnosis, to sit with a dying patient, all of these things that are human, that are things that in some cases you may feel that people are asking you to ignore. So you're not supposed to feel things for your patients. You're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to mourn. You're not supposed to do these things. You can't not do it. You can't not do it. Otherwise, you're a robot, and people can't heal. They can't have a healing encounter with a robot, regardless of what you may have seen on Star Trek Next Generation, okay? So be human, honor your humanity, take care of your human physiology, your emotional needs. Do that too, even though most training programs have tried their best to beat that out of you, believing that that's the only path to being a functioning doctor. It's not. And you don't have to wait until your first or second or third episode of burnout to learn those lessons. You can practice your humanity now.
I love that. And in true preventative, medical practice and action, I think if we can start doing that as early as possible, especially for my medical student listeners, if we can start to practice, those principles, I think we'll get a lot more out of our training and maintain a lot of our energy before we get super exhausted. So again, I really appreciate you being on today. Sincerely a pleasure. And everyone, you can find Dike Drummond on thehappymd.com. Is there anywhere else that they can reach you?
Oh gosh, I've got a Facebook page, The Happy MD. I got a couple Twitter accounts. I mean, I'm on YouTube. I'm all over the place.
Fantastic. So We'll leave those notes on our website as well so people can come check you out. And thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely my pleasure, Taylor. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc podcast, the voice of fulfilled physicians. If you enjoyed the episode, please drop us a like, comment, and share. Share us through the social media channels we have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The handle is @HappyDocPodcast. That's @HappyDocPodcast. You can find our website at www.thehappydoc.com. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians.